What was the reason for the change from the Shadow 2s and the Bentley T series into these style of Bentleys and Rolls Royces?
It was a more modern shape. It's a slightly wider and larger car than the Shadow, and they were updating the technology which had come in the 60s up to late 70s, early 80s technology. The engine, transmission, exactly the same. The suspension had been totally redesigned using Citroen's basis again as in the Shadow. The interior on the earlier Spirits and Bentleys was almost the same as the dashboard on the Shadow 2. The boot was a little bit smaller due to the fact that they'd redesigned the fuel tank and put it behind the seats rather than below them.
Can you sort of quantify a different buyer who would choose a Rolls Royce over a Bentley or vice versa?
Rolls Royce tend to go for the older image, the corporate people who often want to be driven around, for people who are doing executive hire work. The Bentley tends to go more for the younger, more sporting image. Rolls Royce will always be used for chauffeur cars because the Bentley hasn't had that image, and certainly cars like this, the turbocharged vehicle, has appealed to the market of the people who are going up from a 7 Series souped up BMW.
What's the main difference between this Shaped Bentley and the Silver Spirit?
The biggest difference is the later turbos, as of 1989, lost the chrome strip underneath the doors, down the sills, had a deeper front spoiler and a deeper rear air dam underneath the rear bumper. After fuel injection was added in 87, the cars came with twin headlights, lost the washers from the wipers, and had the alloy wheels, which you can see there.
So if you're looking for a Bentley, you would start with the first one that was introduced back in 1980, which was?
A Mulsanne. Then went into the Mulsanne Turbo, which was essentially a Spirit or Mulsanne with a turbocharger on it. The only way you could tell the difference is one had a painted radiator shell, which is still an option to have the chrome shell now.
Now, if you're looking for a Bentley, what sort of money would you expect to pay for a good one?
Depending on the model, the mileage and the history, most of these cars will have done now in excess of 100,000 miles, just due to the simple fact that they are an old car. Starting with an early Mulsanne non-turbocharged car, 10 to 12,000 pounds, turbocharged car, 11, 12 to 15, and then the Turbo R, which is a fuel injection car, and onwards are about 15 to 20,000 pounds and up. The specification always helps. The more options, the more goodies on board, people will always pay better money for. There's never a problem really with mileage on these motor cars. It's a good gearbox. It's been used by General Motors in a lot of other units other than the Rolls Royce and Bentley unit. It's not an expensive unit to service or replace. The type of people who have these motor cars don't thrash them, they don't rev them, so you've not had the same sort of wear on this big engine, a very low revving engine, as perhaps on a smaller, lesser motor car.
There's really only one way to describe the Bentley Turbo R. It's a turbocharged armchair. It is just serene, sitting here, surrounded and pampered by all this leather and wood. Remember, this is a 2.5 ton car. It is big. It takes a lot to get it going, but it's a car that will do 0 to 60 in around 6 seconds. It will cruise all day, if you wanted to do, on the Autobahn or perhaps on the roads down to the south of France, 150 miles an hour. Fuel consumption, well, what was the old thing? If you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. Around town, the Bentley Turbo R would maybe do about 12, 13 miles to the gallon. On a run cruising at 80 miles an hour on the motorway, you might get some 20 miles to the gallon out of it. This is by far my favourite car of the three, I have to say. I've always been a big fan of the Bentley marque. There's something quite different about a Bentley over a Rolls Royce, and particularly when you find something like the Turbo R, which is a car that you can have a huge amount of fun in it. You can push it hard down country lanes. Remember, you have, well, we're not quite sure exactly how much horsepower is under the bonnet because Rolls and Bentley have never quite said what it is. They've merely described the power output of the Turbo R as adequate. The last Turbo R before they brought in the Arnage had 385 brake horsepower, so safe to say that this has probably got some 330, 340 brake horsepower, and believe me, it's more than adequate. So could you be persuaded to buy something like this Bentley Turbo R? Well, remember, it's a big car. It's 2.5 tons. It needs that enormous 6.75 litre V8 engine under the bonnet, and of course the turbocharger as well. What about the price on this? Well, this would set you back about £30,000, but it is in immaculate condition. The leather, the wood, the interior, just perfect. It's done though 123,000 miles, but it will do many, many more miles and will just give you so much enjoyment. You'll be driving around like I am today with a permanent smile on your face.